Welcome to the Sound of Resistance channel. The Russian army is getting more and more lonely every day in Ukraine. Russian President Putin has declared that he needs new allies in the war in Ukraine. The Russian army is subjected to intense attacks by the Ukrainian warriors in the areas it occupied in Ukraine. In Ukraine, the attacks of Zelensky's army are causing incurable wounds in the Russian army. Russia suffered the loss of large number of weapons and military equipment in the conflicts in Ukraine. The Russian army's weapons stocks in Ukraine came to the point of exhaustion, as the Ukrainian army targeted the ammunition in the areas occupied by the Russians. A large number of Russian ammunition became unusable. Another reason why the Russian army's weapons stock in Ukraine are depleted is the effect attacks of the Ukrainian army in the regions occupied by the Russians. The Russian soldiers fled from the region in the face of the attacks of the Ukrainian warriors. The fleeing Russian soldiers left a considerable number of weapons and ammunition in the region. Russia is feeling the negative effects of the weapons and military equipment it lost while withdrawing from the occupied region, even more these days when the Ukrainian army accelerates its attacks. The sanctions imposed on Russia are a major factor in the depletion of the Russian army's weapons stocks. The sanctions imposed on Russia prevent the weapons and ammunition it wants to buy from other countries. Russia was left alone in Ukraine. The Russian army's hands are tied with the decrease in weapons stocks in Ukraine. Russia determined its new strategy to weaken the West, which put a barrier in front of it. Russia took a front against Moldova, which draws attention with its proximity to the West. Russia is preparing a coup in Moldova. Russia does not give up its attempts to interfere and manipulate the internal affairs of Eastern European countries that were once part of the Soviet Union. It turned out that the Federal Security Service of Russian Federation is working to overthrow Moldova's pro-Western government. Moscow is making attempts to attract Moldova to its side. Documentation and interviews with Ukrainian, Moldovan and Western officials show that the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation borrowed dozens of millions of dollars from some of Russia's largest state-owned companies to create a network of Moldovan politicians. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned numerous Russian or Moldovan organizations and individuals, including the Moldovan opposition politician Shor, saying it was coordinating with representatives of other oligarchs to create political unrest in Moldova and receiving Russian support and working engine. Moscow supports a separatist enclave long occupied by Russian troops within Moldovan borders, and the frozen conflict that is curbing Moldovan efforts to integrate with Western Europe. According to the Moldovan opposition politician Shor and the head of the Moldovan Media Oversight Council, management control of Moldova's two main pro-Russian TV channels was transferred to Shor's close partner at the end of September, giving him a major platform to advance an agenda aligned with Moscow. Additionally, captured data shows that the FSB has sent a group of Russian political technologists to advise Shor's party. The Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation oversaw a deal that a Russian oligarch bought to protect one of Shor's main assets from Moldovan authorities and gave its opinion. Russian strategists wrote in a report to the FSB that Shor's party should be positioned as concrete action, populist in the true sense of the word, changing people's life for the better. Moldovan and U.S. officials fear the Kremlin's effort to destroy Moldova, part of a decades-old campaign, could intensify if Russia suffers more casualties in Ukraine. Moldova, which was granted EU candidacy status in June along with Ukraine, is particularly vulnerable to Russian pressure due to its nearly 100% dependence on Russia's gas. Russia's state-controlled natural gas monopoly Gazprom has cut supplies to Moldova by 30% this month, and it's threatening further discounts in November. In addition, the enclave of Transnistria, occupied by Russian troops, which controls the power plant that supplies the remaining 70% of the country's electricity needs. This week, Gazprom said it has sharply reduced these volumes due to gas supply cuts. Officials fear that while the protests organized by Shor in Moldova are relatively minor for now, they could escalate as winter falls and energy crisis will be used to overthrow the government. Moldova's new anti-corruption prosecutor this month detained 24 people, including members of Shor's party, in connection with alleged illegal finance of demonstrations. The only fear of the authorities is not in Moldova. The Suwalki Gap, Kaliningrad and Belarus are now basically a military extension of Russia. There is a potential vulnerability is in this region as Russia could try to cut off the Baltic states from Poland. For the people of Vistitis, a Lithuanian town located just above the Kaliningrad border in the southwestern part of the country, the presence of Russia is a constant threat to which they must get used to. The people of Vistitis expressed that the sound of Russia's attack reached their homes. And former military doctor Vilius Kuchibartis, the town's doctor, said, "We heard the sound of helicopters, maybe we heard tanks shooting. We are afraid because if Ukraine falls, we have a big problem because the Russians will come to us from Kaliningrad and Belarus." He said it is a big risk. Some residents got their cars ready to flee to their neighbor Poland, which they thought was the larger, more sheltered country. Earlier this month, there was a Russian supportive exit from Belarus. Belarus has announced that about 9,000 Russian troops will be sent to the country as part of its regional force grouping. More than 8,000 Lithuanian volunteers signed up to join the militia group, the Riflesmen's Union, while the others fought for the Foreign Legion in Ukraine. The Russian army is using all its means to put a stop to Zelensky's army. Russia continues to carry out large-scale missile attacks in many cities, including capital Kyiv. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said 10 different regions were affected by the attacks and that there were power cuts in hundreds of towns in 7 regions. Shmyhal started that energy facilities were damaged the most in the attacks. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko announced that electricity and water were cut off in some parts of the city. Ukrainian officials stated that the Russians fired more than 50 cruise missiles, but most of them were shot down and destroyed. It was stated that an energy facility providing electricity to 350,000 apartments in the capital was also damaged with the attacks of Russia. Kyiv Mayor Klitschko said that 4 out of every 5 people were affected by the water shortage and repairs are ongoing. The heroic people of Ukraine and their invincible army continue their struggle with determination to show that the invasion efforts of the Russians are in vain. Russia's dirty plans on Moldova are a sign of Russians' helplessness. The fact that Russian commanders gave orders to target the urban centers of Ukraine is the biggest proof that they do not care about the lives of civilians living in the region. All these developments explain why Russia was left alone during its invasion of Ukraine. The Russian military's efforts in Ukraine could be their last moribund. Because the Ukrainian warriors prepared the ground of the collapse of the Russian army with their attacks on the Russian fronts. The Russian army lost a lot of blood in Ukraine. Returning home to Russia seems to be the best option for them. President of Ukraine Zelensky expressed that he never lost his belief that they would win from the very beginning of the war. Zelensky thanked the heroic Ukrainians for not leaving him alone in the Russian case. Thank you for watching us.